My boyfriend, who's 5 years older than me, wants to marry me, but I already have someone else. What should I do? I accidentally saw this post from my girlfriend. My name is Ryan Carter, and until 2 nights ago, I thought I understood the woman I loved. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Ethan's Way. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It started like any other lazy evening. I was sprawled on the couch laptop, balanced on my knees, half watching some YouTube tech review, while absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone. My girlfriend Emily was in the bedroom catching up on work emails. At least that's what she said. We'd been together for 2 years. She was beautiful in that effortless way, light brown hair always falling into her face, eyes that could switch from soft to sharp in a heartbeat. I loved her, trusted her. She was my safe place. Or so I thought. Out of boredom, I tapped into one of those anonymous confession forums. People posted their life dilemmas there, sometimes silly, sometimes heartbreaking. I was scrolling without much interest when a headline caught my eye. My boyfriend, who's 5 years older than me, wants to marry me, but I already have someone else. What should I do? The words didn't stab me right away. They just sat there in my brain like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. But then I noticed the posting time just a few hours ago, and the details in the body of the post. She wrote about how her boyfriend was kind, dependable, and works from home as a web developer, how they'd been together for exactly 2 years, and how he wanted to settle down, but she wasn't sure because she'd met someone who made her feel more alive. I read it once, then again. My stomach tightened. Every line felt like a fingerprint pointing directly at me. The way she described our cozy apartment with a desk near the window that was my setup, the little comment about my habit of ordering takeout instead of cooking, that was my life. It wasn't just similar, it was exactly us. I sat there frozen, my thumb hovering over the screen, reading it again and again, as if maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something harmless. They didn't. Inside me, something cracked. Not loudly, it wasn't a dramatic explosion. More like a slow, sickening split, the kind you feel in your chest when a truth you never wanted begins to settle in. From the bedroom, I could hear the soft clicking of her laptop keys. My Emily, my betrayer. I wanted to storm and shove the phone in her face, demand an explanation. But my body refused to move. A part of me, maybe the part that's always been afraid to lose her, whispered that I needed to be sure before I said a single word. So I didn't confront her that night. I closed the app, set my phone face down, and forced myself to act normal. We had dinner. She told me about some work project she was stressed about. She smiled across the table, and for the first time I realized I didn't believe her smile. When she kissed me goodnight, I kept my eyes open. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a simple breakup. No, I was going to find the truth piece by piece, and when I had it, I'd decide how she'd pay for what she'd done. But for now, I just lay there in the dark, my heart hammering the glow of her phone screen, faintly lighting the room from her side of the bed. If she thought I was clueless, she was in for a surprise. The morning after finding that post, the world looked exactly the same, but felt entirely different. Sunlight poured in through the blinds, the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, and the faint sound of Emily humming carried through the air. It was all so normal, so domestic, and yet it was like watching a movie set after discovering the lead actress hated the director. I lingered in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling. My chest felt heavy, like someone had quietly set a brick on it during the night. The post kept replaying in my head in jagged fragments. My boyfriend, 5 years older, already have someone else. Every word felt like a splinter I couldn't pull out. When I finally dragged myself into the kitchen, she was standing by the stove in one of my hoodies, sleeves bunched up at her wrist, hair tied in a messy bun. She turned when she heard me and flashed a warm smile, the kind I used to think could melt glaciers. Now I wondered how many other people had seen that same smile. "Morning," she said. "Want eggs?" I nodded, forcing my voice to stay even. "Sure." I sat at the counter, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug as if it could anchor me. She moved around the kitchen with easy familiarity, humming to the beat of some song only she could hear. And as I watched her, something shifted inside me. The girl I thought I knew was starting to fade, replaced by a stranger who wore her face. It's incredible how quickly doubt rewires your brain. 2 weeks ago, if she'd told me she was busy at work, I would have believed her without question. Now every vague answer, every half smile, every glance at her phone felt like a breadcrumb, leading me somewhere I didn't want to go. as she cracked eggs into a pan and my mind started stitching together moments I had brushed aside. Last Friday, she said she was grabbing drinks with a friend from college, a woman named Claire I'd never met. She came home later than expected, smelling faintly of cologne. When I teased her about it, she laughed it off and said the guy sitting next to her at the bar wore too much aftershave. I let it go. 2 weeks before that, she'd gone quiet during dinner after receiving a text. She'd smiled at the screen, typed something, and then set the phone face down. And just 3 nights ago, she'd taken a work call in the bedroom, with the door closed, something she never did before. I'd chalked it up to work stress, personal space, mood swings. Now every memory felt like another nail in a coffin I didn't even know existed. She slid the plate of eggs in front of me, sat down across the counter, and asked about my workday. I told her I had a few deadlines to hit, and she nodded without offering much about her own schedule. That was another shift I'd noticed. She'd gone from telling me every minor detail about her day to keeping things vague. After breakfast, I retreated to my desk in the living room, trying to focus on my coding project. My fingers typed automatically, but my brain was running a different program entirely. I kept replaying the post in my head, imagining her writing it. Did she smile as she typed? Did she hesitate before pressing post? Oh, was the other guy sitting across from her when she hit submit around noon? Emily came out of the bedroom, her hair down, now her hoodie swapped for a fitted jacket. "I'm gonna go for a walk," she said casually. I looked up from my screen. "A walk?" "Yeah, clear my head a bit. Been staring at the laptop too long." She smiled. "You want anything while I'm out?" "No, I'm good," I said, masking my suspicion with a neutral tone. Emily wasn't a walker, not unless we were together. She was the type to Uber to the grocery store, even if it was just 3 blocks away. A midday walk was out of character. I listened to the door close behind her. The apartment felt too quiet. My eyes drifted toward the bedroom. Her laptop was still sitting on the bed screen, dark, but the faint light of the charging cable glowing. I don't think I took a breath as I stepped inside. It's not that I wanted to snoop, or at least that's what I told myself, but there's a difference between invading someone's privacy and protecting yourself from being blindsided by betrayal. I pressed a key and the screen lit up. The desktop background was the same, a picture of us at the lake last summer. We were smiling, my arm around her shoulders, her cheek pressed against mine. My chest tightened looking at it. Her messaging app was open, but the chat list was empty. No recent messages, no history. She'd cleared it. I closed the laptop and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were trembling, not from guilt, but from confirmation. People don't wipe their conversations unless they have something to hide. That single action told me more than 1,000 texts ever could. I went back to my desk, but my work screen blurred in front of me. I could feel something in me hardening, not just anger, but resolve. The rest of the day was a performance. When she came back, I asked how her walk was. She said good and kissed my cheek. I smiled like nothing had changed, but inside I was already planning. If she was going to keep secrets, I'd make it my mission to learn them all. I'd track her digital footprints, her patterns, her absences. I wouldn't confront her until I had a picture so complete she wouldn't be able to twist her way out of it. And when that moment came, she'd know exactly who she'd been underestimating. That night, as she scrolled through her phone beside me in bed, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. Her face was lit by the screen eyes, darting fingers, typing smile faint. She didn't notice me watching, and for the first time in 2 years, I realized I didn't know who was lying next to me anymore. After that night, there was no going back. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't the same man who'd blindly trusted her, who'd looked at her and believed every word without question. Now I was hunting. The next morning, Emily left early. She said she had a meeting at a cafe across town with a client. I smiled, nodded, wished her luck. But the moment the door closed, I felt my pulse quicken. I walked straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the tools I usually use for work. Only now, they weren't for work. I was going to build a map of her online life. You'd be surprised at how much you can learn from patterns. I didn't even need her passwords at first, just observation. The times she went online, the frequency she was on certain platforms, the sudden silences in our conversations that lined up perfectly with bursts of activity on her profiles. It started with her social media. I'd never been the jealous type, so I never dug deep before. But now, every comment, every like, every tag location became a breadcrumb. I noticed something immediately. About a month ago, she'd started following a small set of accounts that had nothing to do with her usual circles accounts tied to photography, expensive wine, and boutique hotels. One of them belonged to a man named Daniel Reed. Daniel was older, mid-30s, maybe late 30s, well-dressed, in every photo confident smile, always standing in front of luxury cars or high-end restaurants. The kind of man who looked like he always knew the best table to reserve and the exact wine to order. I clicked through his posts, and there she was, not in the photos but in the likes. Always quick to hit that little heart sometimes within minutes of him posting. Then I noticed something else, his captions. They weren't directly about her, but they had a tone that made my skin crawl. Phrases like "some people are worth rearranging your schedule for" and "late night talks with the right person are addictive." The comments underneath were worse. A handful of them had replies from Emily, casual, playful, but with a certain intimacy I recognize. That's the thing about being with someone for years. You learn the exact way they flirt without even meaning to. By the time I was done scrolling, my hands were clenched into fists, but I needed more than vague connections. I needed proof. I installed a keylogger on her laptop, something I'd only ever used for corporate clients during security audits. It would quietly record every keystroke, every password, every message typed. I also set up a hidden camera app on my spare phone and tucked it behind a stack of books in the bedroom, angled toward her desk. That evening, I played it cool. We had dinner, we watched a movie, we laughed. Or rather, she laughed. I was acting. Every smile, every nod, every brush of my hand against hers was calculated. When she went to bed, I stayed up finishing work. But really, I was syncing the first batch of data from the keylogger. Most of it was harmless grocery lists, search queries about skincare, random texts to friends. But then I saw it a string of messages in a chat window with someone saved only as D. They weren't romantic in the obvious way, "No, I love you," or "Can't wait to see you," but they didn't need to be. The intimacy was in the details. D, same place, tomorrow, Emily. Yeah, same time. You picked the wine this time. D got something special in mind, Emily. Looking forward to it, looking forward to it. I stared at those words until they blurred. My throat felt tight. My jaw ached from clenching it. The next day, she told me she was working from the library. I nodded, kissed her goodbye, and then followed 10 minutes later, keeping my distance. Sure enough, she didn't go to the library. She went to a small Italian restaurant on the east side, and there he was, Daniel Reed in a navy blazer, standing as she walked in, kissing her cheek, like they'd done it 100 times before. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I stood across the street, hidden behind the flow of pedestrians, and watched them settle into a corner table. The way she leaned toward him, the way he touched her hand when she laughed, it was like watching a play where I'd been cut from the cast without notice. For a moment, I almost walked away, pretend I never saw it, pretend I could go home and live in ignorance. But that's not who I am, not anymore. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took the first photo, then another, and another. Evidence. Not to beg her to choose me. No, I was past that. I wanted the truth exposed, and I wanted control over how it came out. By the time they left walking side by side, her arm brushing his, I had enough to start building my case. That night, as she sat beside me scrolling through her phone, I didn't look at her. I didn't have to. I was already planning exactly how this was going to end for her, and it wasn't going to be clean. For the rest of the week, Daniel Reed became my obsession. It wasn't just about knowing who he was, it was about understanding everything that made him the kind of man Emily would risk destroying our relationship for. Late at night, when Emily was asleep, I'd sit at my desk in the dim glow of my laptop, combing through every trace he'd left online. His Instagram was a curated highlight, real exotic travel destinations, rooftop bars with panoramic city views, wine bottles worth more than my monthly rent. On LinkedIn, he was senior creative director at a high-profile marketing agency downtown. I couldn't help but compare myself to him. He wore tailored suits that looked like they'd been measured to the millimeter. I wore hoodies and jeans. He posted about closing six-figure deals. I posted pictures of my cat curled up next to my keyboard. His world seemed glossy, sharp-edged, intoxicating. And for a few bitter nights, I let myself believe that maybe I was simply outclassed. Maybe this wasn't about betrayal. Maybe it was about inevitability. Emily in her mid-20s still wanted excitement status, the thrill of being with someone who could sweep her into a penthouse party at a moment's notice. And I was stability, comfort, predictable. The thought sat in my chest like a stone. But then as I scrolled further back on his profiles, I started to see cracks. Pictures with different women, none of whom stuck around for more than a few months. Cryptic captions about loyalty being rare posted right after a breakup. A comment thread under one photo where someone joked about him being a serial dater, and he'd responded with a winking emoji. That was when it clicked. Daniel wasn't some mythical perfect man, he was just another player. Smooth enough to get in, but too restless to stay. Emily wasn't trading me for a better man. She was trading me for a short-lived fantasy. And that made it worse, because it meant she wasn't just betraying me for something permanent or life-changing. She was throwing away what we had for a fleeting thrill. I decided then that if she was going to gamble, she was going to lose big. The next step was gathering more concrete proof. I dug deeper, not just into his public life, but into his habits. Using some of the tools I'd honed as a web developer, I tracked his check-ins, his tag locations, and even cross-referenced timestamps from Emily's phone activity. The overlaps were undeniable. Tuesday evening, Emily tells me she's meeting a friend to go over work proposals. 30 minutes later, Daniel posts a photo of an artisanal cocktail at a speakeasy downtown. Emily's phone goes silent for 2 hours, exactly the duration of his tag location there. Thursday afternoon, she claims she's helping her mom run errands. Daniel uploads a shot from a quiet riverside park. Guess who happened to go for a walk that day? Each match was another nail in the coffin. I wasn't just speculating anymore. I was building a timeline that could dismantle every excuse she might throw at me later. One night, I even followed her again, not directly, but strategically. I left 10 minutes after she took a different route and parked across from the hotel I suspected they used. I didn't even need to see them enter together. I just waited until I saw her car in the lot, and then saw his a few spaces away. This sight made my skin crawl. When she came home later, she smelled faintly of the same cologne I'd caught before. She kissed me on the cheek, said she was exhausted, and went straight to bed. I sat in the living room, staring at the darkened TV screen, and realized I wasn't hurt in the way I'd expected. I wasn't broken. I was cold, detached, calculating, and that was dangerous for her, because I wasn't going to confront her in a shouting match. I wasn't going to give her a chance to twist the story to cry to pretend she was the victim. No, I was going to make sure she couldn't hide. She wanted Daniel fine. I'd make sure they both had to see each other for who they really were, not in private, not behind closed doors, but in a moment where the entire facade came crashing down. By the end of that week, I'd already started sketching the outline of a plan. It was going to involve timing, precision, and a little bit of theater. But before I could set it in motion, I needed one more thing, a moment from her own lips that confirmed she'd chosen him over me. Not because I needed to hear it, but because it would be the final piece of evidence I'd use to destroy the little world she thought she'd built. And for that, I was going to bait her into telling me exactly what I wanted to know without her realizing she was handing me the rope to hang her with. I didn't rush. That was the point. Betrayal thrives in shadows, but it also gets sloppy when it feels safe. I needed Emily comfortable enough to leak without thinking, so I changed nothing about my routine. I made coffee for us in the mornings, asked about our meetings, and kissed her cheek when she left, and then I set traps. First, I planted a seed that sounded like opportunity. Over dinner, I told her I'd been offered a weekend consulting gig in a nearby city, 2 nights good money, short notice. I made it sound tentative, like I wasn't sure I'd accept. Palmview, I said, casually spearing a piece of roasted carrot. A startup wants me on site this Saturday and Sunday. I haven't decided. She barely looked up. That sounds promising. Is the money good? Very, I said, but I might pass. Weekends are kind of sacred for us. That last sentence was bait on a hook. If she wanted a free weekend, she'd encourage me to go. If she planned to see Daniel, she'd need me out of the way. Either way, I'd learn something. She took a beat too long. You should go, she said brightly. It's just a weekend. Besides, it's good for your portfolio. I smiled. Maybe. That night, the keylogger gave me the first tug on the line. She typed, "He might be out of town, sat son. Could be easier. No name, just D. And then yes, Palmview. I'll confirm tomorrow." I leaned back in my chair and felt something cold settle into place. Not fury clarity. The second trap was smaller, almost playful. One of Daniel's favorite bars was a place known for its wine list. I'd noticed they posted bottles on Instagram like trophies. So the next evening, while Emily curled up beside me on the couch, I remembered a preference I'd never had. I think I'm getting into Pinot Noir, I said, scrolling on my phone. I read this blog about how delicate and complex it is. Maybe I'll order it next time we go out. She nodded, not really listening, but later the keylogger recorded a message to D he's into Pinot now, lol. 2 days after that, Daniel posted a story clinking glasses with someone off camera. If you know, Pinot night. Emily's phone went dark for 2 hours. A coincidence? Maybe, but I wasn't living in coincidences anymore. The third trap was a calendar ghost. I created a private event on our shared Google Calendar, something I knew she checked regularly. Ring research with Matt scheduled for Thursday at 5 p.m. Matt is my cousin. In reality, he lives 3 states away. The event had no alerts, no notes. It just sat there, humming with implication. Emily didn't mention it. She didn't ask. But that evening, I watched her type. He might propose soon. There's a ring thing on his calendar. Maybe he's just looking IDK. Be prepared. Be prepared. As if love were a natural disaster she and Daniel needed to board the windows for. I added a 4th signal because I couldn't resist the canary file. I dropped a simple PDF into a visible folder on my laptop named Monarch Chot Coin Proposal.pdf. Monarch Coin doesn't exist. I made the PDF myself with a few pages of slick-looking crypto jargon complete with a fake logo. Within 24 hours, Daniel tweeted a half-joke I never would have seen if I hadn't set up alerts on his name. If one more guy tries to get me into a Monarch coin, I'm buying a horse and moving to the countryside. The laugh emoji at the end might as well have been a fingerprint. By then I had patterns, by then I had timestamps, and by then the part of me that still wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding had gone quiet. The hardest trap was conversational, the kind that required me to sit across from Emily and lure her into revealing herself. I waited until a Sunday morning, the kind that felt clean and slow sunlight spilling across our kitchen table. She was making pancakes, I was cutting strawberries. Hypothetical, I said, keeping my voice light. Let's say someone asked you to marry them, but you weren't sure. Not because they're bad or anything, just because you met someone exciting. What would you do? She froze. That was the only crack she let slip, the spatula hovering in midair for half a second more than it should have. Then she smiled and kept flipping the pancake. I wouldn't say yes, she said. That wouldn't be fair. But would you tell him the truth? I asked. What truth? She said with a laugh that squeezed my heart in a way I'll never fully forgive myself for. That there's someone else. She didn't turn around. That's a pretty grim hypothetical, Rye. Yeah, I said, just curious. Later that afternoon, she typed, he asked a weird hypothetical about marriage and someone else. I think he's suspicious. D wrote back, be careful, we can lay low a week. And then Emily again, he's traveling next weekend anyway, should be fine. So she had decided for me. I decided for her. The delicate part was keeping my face still while I rewrote our immediate future. I started by accepting the Palmview gig. I told her I'd leave Saturday morning, return Monday. She kissed me and told me she was proud of me. On her phone, she wrote, confirmed. Next, I needed to see whether she would risk bringing Daniel closer to our life when she thought I was gone. So I staged a conversation for her to overhear. I called Matt on speaker, talked loudly in the living room about proposal styles, even opened an engagement ring website with a scrolling gallery. It wasn't performance, it was pressure. I wanted to see what she did when cornered by future tense. She cracked in an unexpected way. That night she curled into me and said almost dreamily, do you ever think about what kind of wedding you'd want? Sure, I said. Do you? She paused. Sometimes. Then so quietly I almost missed it. Sometimes I think, I'm not ready. That's fair, I said, because truthfully I wasn't asking to marry her, not anymore. What I wanted was to watch the scaffolding of lies collapse in the cleanest possible light. The last trap was the cruelest. I told her my Palmview hotel room, 713 Harbor Suites. I left the confirmation email open on my laptop as if by accident. Then I booked room 713, here in our city at a different Harbor Suites location, 20 minutes away. Same chain, different address. If she checked, it would look legitimate. If she showed up to surprise me, she'd be in the wrong place. For my purposes, both outcomes were useful. On Saturday morning, I packed a bag and hugged her goodbye. She stood in the doorway in an oversized sweater hair, pulled into a loose ponytail, looking like every memory I had of loving her. It would have split me in two if I hadn't already turned to ice. "Drive safe," she said, lifting her chin to kiss me. "You too," I said, and she laughed because she wasn't going anywhere, at least not anywhere she wanted me to know about. I didn't drive to Palmview. I drove to a friend's apartment across town, parked in the underground garage, and killed the engine. I sat there for a long minute with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing in the quiet of a car that didn't know how to lie. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the feed from the little camera I'd disguised as a travel clock in our bedroom. At 1:13 p.m., she came home. At 1:40, she showered. At 2:25, she stood in front of the mirror and put on the green dress she'd once told me made her feel like a woman men write songs about. At 2:48, she typed, "Leaving now." Meanwhile, Daniel posted nothing. Too smart for that. But at 3:10, a rideshare pinged near the exact wine bar where he liked to sit in the back. 5 minutes later, the keylogger captured a message from Emily's laptop to her friend Claire. "He's out of town. I can finally breathe." I watched until watching became pointless. Seeing the betrayal in motion was no longer necessary. I'd engineered the proof. The chessboard was set. The pieces were exactly where I needed them. But there was one last test. I wanted something intimate enough that it would bend her reflexes, force her into a choice. At 6:15 p.m., I texted Emily from Palmview, long day. "Thinking of you." I waited. At 6:22, she replied, "Miss you too? How's the hotel?" I smiled, small and humorless, and sent a photo of a generic hallway I'd pulled from the Harbor Suites website weeks ago when I'd started planning this. She heart reacted. Then 5 minutes later, she typed to D, "He's texting. Says the hotel is nice. We're fine. We." That word did something weird to me, like a bruise you don't feel until someone presses it. Not pain exactly. Recognition. The person who could have been my family had made a new pronoun with a stranger. I'd stopped being the man Emily loved. I'd become the alibi Emily used. I put my phone face down and finally let my plan stand up to its full height. The dinner. The invites. The surprise I'd hinted at to both of them in different ways. The ring gallery she'd seen, the calendar entry, the talk with Matt. All of it leading to one night where there would be one table, one truth, and no exits that didn't go through me. The traps had worked. The signals had traveled. Now it was time to make sure all those whispers had an audience. By Monday morning, I had everything I needed: messages, timestamps, photos, even the psychological tells that would sink her if she tried to deny anything. The only thing left was the delivery. This wasn't going to be a blow-up fight in our living room, voices raised, neighbors overhearing. That would give her too many escape hatches. She could cry, slam a door, walk away before I'd said my piece. No, I needed her trapped in a setting where appearances mattered, where she'd be too concerned about how she looked to anyone watching to just bolt. That meant a public setting. And not just public personal, somewhere with significance. The choice came to me faster than I expected. Roselli's. It was a mid-range Italian place on the east side. It's where I'd taken her for our 6-month anniversary, where she'd told me she couldn't believe how lucky she was to have me. Ironic. I reserved a private corner booth under my name for Saturday night. But a dinner with just the two of us wouldn't be enough. I wanted Daniel there too. That part took more precision. I had no direct contact with him, but I had leverage, an alias, and a lie. Using a fresh email account, I posed as the event coordinator for Roselli's and sent him a message saying he'd been selected for an exclusive tasting menu for loyal customers, 2 seats reserved free of charge, courtesy of the manager. I even included a fake phone number mine and told him to call to confirm. He called within 2 hours. I disguised my voice just enough and confirmed his booking for Saturday at 7 p.m., same time, same booth as Emily's. I told him the other guests would be a surprise pairing part of the experience. That was the easy part. Getting Emily there without suspicion was trickier. I couldn't just say, "Let's go to Roselli's." She might be wary, especially after our hypothetical marriage talk. So I went the opposite direction. I told her my Palmview gig had gone so well, they'd offered me another short job, but I wanted to celebrate before I left. "Your choice," I said, sliding my phone across the table for her to pick the place. She thought about it, then smiled. "What about Roselli's? We haven't been in ages." The universe was doing me favors I didn't deserve. For the rest of the week, I kept the performance flawless. I made coffee for her in the mornings. I asked about her meetings. I even pretended to be mildly disappointed when she said she'd be busy Thursday night. I knew exactly where she'd be. My camera had caught her slipping out in that same green dress, and my alerts told me Daniel had checked in at a rooftop lounge 15 minutes later. I didn't care. It was the last Thursday night she'd have with him, where she still felt untouchable. By Friday, I could sense her energy shifting. She was sharper, more distant, as if bracing for something. Maybe she sensed the undercurrent in me, or maybe she was just nervous about managing two men at once in public. Either way, it didn't matter. Saturday was coming. That morning, I woke up early and watched her sleep for a long time. Her hair spilled across the pillow, her breathing soft, her face the same one I'd once imagined growing old with. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel sadness. I felt done. In the afternoon, I ironed a shirt I hadn't worn in months, a crisp white one she used to compliment. She wore a deep red dress I hadn't seen in over a year. The one she'd said made her feel powerful. Appropriate, I thought, given how quickly that power was about to evaporate. We drove together, her in the passenger seat, scrolling on her phone, me with one hand on the wheel and one on the plan I'd been tightening like a knot for weeks. Rosselli's was warm and glowing when we arrived, golden light spilling from the windows. I led her to the corner booth, pretending not to notice the second place setting across from us. She frowned slightly. "Why are there three surprise?" I said with a small smile, my tone unreadable. And then Daniel walked in. I caught the exact moment her face froze, not shock, not fear, but the rapid calculation of a liar realizing they've been cornered. Daniel's eyes flicked from her to me and back again, confusion etched into every line of his expression. He reached the table. "Emily." I gestured for him to sit. "I think we should all have dinner together. Clear the air." No one moved for a beat. The restaurant noise blurred around us. Finally, Daniel slid into the seat, his gaze still locked on her. "What's going on?" That I said leaning back is exactly what I've been wondering. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was thick, electric, and for the first time in weeks, I felt in complete control, because now the stage was set, and all she could do was play her part until the curtain fell. The moment Daniel sat down, I could feel the tension radiating off both of them, like heat from a stovetop. Emily's shoulders were stiff, her jaw, tight eyes darting between us. Daniel, on the other hand, was still trying to figure out which playbook to grab, whether to pretend ignorance or to push for an explanation right away. I leaned back in my seat, letting the silence stretch just enough to make them squirm. The waitress approached with menus, her cheerful smile colliding head-on with the frost at our table. I waved her off gently. "Give us a few minutes, please." As soon as she was gone, I looked at Emily. "Do you want to tell him, or should I?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, she glanced at Daniel like he might step in and rescue her. That was my first small victory, seeing her reach for the lifeline she thought she had, only to realize I was in control of the water she was drowning in. Daniel frowned, turning to her. "Tell me what." I rested my elbows on the table, lacing my fingers. "How about this? We start with a game. I'll say a date, and you both tell me where you were." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Ryan, this isn't April 14th, I said, cutting her off. Daniel's brow furrowed. I don't." "The rooftop lounge at Monarch Hotel," I continued smoothly. 2 hours Pinot Noir corner table. I looked at Emily. "You told me you were at your mom's." Daniel shifted in his seat, his confusion melting into something more defensive. "What is this?" "This," I said, my voice calm as me giving you both a chance to be honest before I lay everything out. Emily's face was pale now, but her tone was sharp. "You're being ridiculous. You've been spying on me." I let out a low laugh. "Spying?" "No, Emily. Spying is guessing. I have proof. Timestamps, messages, photos. Should I show him the one from the Italian restaurant last Thursday? Or maybe the one from the Riverside Park?" Daniel's eyes snapped to her. "Wait, you told me you were single." Her head jerked toward him. Daniel, I was going to." "You were going to what I said. Wait until I proposed so you could reject me and make it cleaner. Or maybe wait until you were sure he'd keep you around before cutting me loose." She turned back to me, anger finally breaking through her shock. "You're twisting everything." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, swiping to the folder I'd labeled Final Act. "Here's the chat where you tell him I'll be in Palm View for the weekend so you can finally breathe. Here's the one where you laugh about me liking Pinot now. And here's my personal favorite where you tell him to be prepared, because I might propose soon." Daniel's face had drained of color. "You told me you weren't seeing anyone, that you were starting fresh." Emily's voice cracked. "Daniel, I didn't think." No, I said, leaning forward. You didn't think. Not about me, not about him. You thought you could juggle us both until one of us became the better option. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the low hum of the restaurant around us. I could see the wheels turning in Daniel's head, the calculation, the slow realization that he wasn't special. He was just next in line. Finally, he pushed back his chair. I'm not doing this. Emily reached for his arm. Wait. He pulled away sharply. Good luck, Emily. You're going to need it. And just like that, he walked out, leaving her staring after him with her mouth slightly open, as if the air had been punched out of her. When she turned back to me, there was nothing left of the confident, evasive woman I'd been dealing with for weeks. She looked small, cornered. I loved you, she said, almost pleading. No, I said quietly. You loved the version of me that didn't see you clearly, the one who trusted you without question. That man's gone. Her eyes glistened. You don't have to do this here. I didn't have to do any of this, I said, standing. But I did, because you don't get to rewrite this story in your favor. You wanted to play games, this is how they end. I dropped a folder onto the table. Inside were printed copies of every piece of evidence I'd collected, dates, screenshots, photos. This is for you, I said. A little keepsake from the last few weeks. She didn't touch it. I left her there in that booth, the red dress now looking like a costume from a role she'd just been fired from. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction, just a deep, steady quiet, the kind that comes when the last piece falls exactly where you placed it, and I knew I was only halfway done. I didn't go home that night. I didn't want to walk through the door and smell her perfume still lingering in the air, or see her shoes neatly lined by the entryway like nothing had happened. I wanted distance, a buffer between the man who'd sat in that booth and the one who would walk into the apartment next. So I drove, aimlessly at first through quiet neighborhoods where the streetlights cast long shadows over empty sidewalks. My mind wasn't racing the way I thought it would. No spiraling questions, no gnawing ache in my chest. Just clarity. The kind that feels almost like peace, but sharper. I ended up at my friend Josh's place. He was one of the few people I trusted to ask no questions if I showed up unannounced. We drank whiskey in silence on his balcony until the city lights blurred a little, and then I crashed on his couch. The next morning, I woke to a string of messages from Emily. Ryan, please come home. We need to talk. I'm sorry about last night. You didn't have to humiliate me like that. Can you at least hear me out? I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a separate folder on my phone, one I'd started before the dinner labeled Fallout. This was my final stage, not just confronting her, but ensuring she couldn't twist the story into something where she came out looking like the victim. Step 1 was controlling the narrative. I called a mutual friend, Chloe, who I knew would take my side. Chloe had been suspicious of Emily for months but hadn't wanted to get involved. I gave her the condensed version, no anger, just facts, dates, times, evidence. Then I asked her to share it quietly with anyone who might hear Emily's side later. Not gossip, just truth preemptively planted. Step 2 was cleaning house. I didn't want to come back to our apartment as if it still belonged to both of us, so I called a locksmith and arranged for the locks to be changed that afternoon. Then I had a courier pick up her things, a few bags of clothes, shoes, and whatever else she'd left in the bathroom. No sentimental items, no excuses to linger. By the time I pulled into the apartment garage, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. I'm outside. Can we talk? I took the elevator up without answering. Sure enough, she was waiting by the door when I arrived. Makeup, smudged hair, pulled back, wearing that gray hoodie she used to steal from me after workouts. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, but I didn't let that sway me. Ryan, she started. The locks are being changed, I said evenly, unlocking the door and stepping inside. Your things are gone. They'll be delivered to you later today. She followed me in, ignoring the boundary I'd just drawn. You're really ending this without even letting me explain. You had weeks to explain, I said. Every day was a chance to tell me the truth. You didn't take it. Her voice cracked. It wasn't. Daniel wasn't. Don't insult me by pretending you didn't choose him. I cut in. You didn't just cheat Emily. You made me part of your alibi. That's worse. She blinked rapidly the way she always did when she was cornered. I didn't want to hurt you. I laughed short, humorless. You wanted to have both. That's different. She tried another tactic, softer now. We were good together. We could be again if stop. My tone was final. You don't get to rewrite this. You don't get to say we anymore. She swallowed hard, and for a moment I thought she might actually leave without another word. But then her expression shifted, calculation slipping through the cracks of her guilt. You think this makes you look noble? People will think you're petty, that you set me up. And there it was, the play she'd been holding in her back pocket. If she couldn't win me back, she'd poison the way others saw me. Maybe I said meeting her gaze, but they'll think it knowing exactly what you did. Her face faltered, then the last bit of control slipping. So that's it? That's it? I said. Goodbye, Emily. I opened the door. She stood there for a moment like she might say something else, but finally stepped into the hall. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The quiet that followed wasn't comforting, not yet, but it was clean, and I knew that in time it would be enough. That night, I sent Daniel one last message from my real number. Just one line. You were never the only one. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The point wasn't conversation. It was closure on my terms. I sat back on the couch, then the apartment mine again, and realized the strangest thing. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I'd been deliberate, I'd been precise, and now it was done. And the next time I trusted someone, it would be with eyes wide open. For the first few days after Emily was gone, the apartment felt too big. Not physically, the space hadn't changed, but in the way a room can feel hollow when the air isn't shaped by another person's presence. There were no faint footsteps from the bedroom to the kitchen, no sudden bursts of laughter from the couch when she scrolled through something on her phone. Just silence. At first I thought the emptiness would gnaw at me, make me wonder if I'd made the wrong call. But the longer it stayed, the more it felt like oxygen, pure, unpolluted. Still, there were moments when the ghost of her routine brushed against mine. I'd open the fridge and see a jar of her favorite jam tucked behind the milk. I'd go to throw my hoodie on the couch and remember how she used to curl up in it like it was hers. These were small, stupid things, but they reminded me that betrayal doesn't just rip through the big promises, it lingers in the tiny, ordinary spaces too. I decided early on I wouldn't let those remnants fester. I packed the jam, the hoodie, the half-empty bottle of her perfume, and left them in a donation bin. The apartment wasn't a museum to our failed relationship, it was mine again, and I was going to live like it. The real challenge wasn't Emily's absence, it was what she'd left behind inside me questions. Not about her, I had more than enough answers, but about myself. Why hadn't I noticed sooner? Was I too trusting or just too blind? And why did a part of me still wonder if Daniel had won? Even though I'd watched him walk away from her, I found myself replaying the dinner in my head, not to savor it, but to analyze it. The look on Daniel's face when I laid out the evidence, it wasn't the look of a man who had been wronged in the same way I had. His was a sharper, cleaner cut. He'd been deceived, yes, but without the slow drip of suspicion, the mental erosion that comes from living beside a lie for weeks. No, what I'd gone through wasn't just betrayal, it was erosion of the foundation I thought I had. And rebuilding that foundation was going to take more than changing the locks. I started small. I took morning runs again, the kind I used to enjoy before I'd gotten comfortable letting Emily sleep in while I made breakfast. I called friends I hadn't seen in months, people I'd unintentionally drifted from because I was always busy with her. And I started turning down work projects that felt like busy work, focusing on clients that challenged me instead. It was strange. Rebuilding wasn't just about filling the spaces Emily had left. It was about reclaiming the parts of me I'd set aside for her. And the more I leaned into that, the more I realized something the anger I'd expected to hang around forever was already fading. It had burned hot while I needed it, fueling the plan, the traps, the confrontation. But now that the plan was done, anger had no place left to go. That didn't mean forgiveness. Forgiveness wasn't on the table. But indifference, that was the goal. One night, about a week after she left, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Heard what happened. If it's true, you did the right thing. No name, no follow-up. I stared at it for a while, then deleted it without replying. It didn't matter who it was from. My story was already out there moving without me, and I didn't feel the need to steer it anymore. A few days later, Chloe invited me to a small dinner with some friends. I almost said no. I wasn't in the mood for pitying looks or whispered side conversations, but I went. And to my surprise, it wasn't about Emily at all. We laughed about stupid memories, traded work horror stories, and for the first time in weeks I left a gathering without feeling like there was a shadow trailing me home. That night I lay in bed and thought about the future, not in the abstract someday sense, but in small, tangible ways. Weekend trips I could take, skills I could learn, people I could meet without wondering if I was being compared to someone else. I realized then that my life hadn't ended at that dinner table in Roselli's. It had pivoted, and while that pivot was messy and painful, it was also freeing. The last thread I had to cut was Emily herself. She'd sent a few more messages, shorter each time, as if testing whether I'd finally soften. I never replied, and one morning without ceremony I blocked her number. No anger, no speech, just closure. When I stepped outside that day, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but mine. Every breath mine, every step mine, and that was enough. I wasn't healed yet. Maybe I wouldn't be for a while. But I was moving, and moving was better than standing still in the wreckage she'd left behind. It had been 3 months since Emily walked out of my life for the last time. 3 months of silence, of unbroken days without her name lighting up my phone. I'd built a new rhythm: morning runs, steady work dinners with friends, weekends that belonged only to me. I wasn't naive enough to call it healing, but it was distance, and distance was a kind of freedom. That's why I didn't see it coming. It was a Thursday evening, one of those early spring days when the air still carried a bite, but the city streets felt alive again. I'd gone to meet a client at a small coffee shop downtown. The meeting ran long, and by the time I stepped out, dusk was spilling over the skyline. I took a shortcut through the pedestrian plaza, half empty now, the sound of heels clicking and the occasional burst of laughter from nearby bars. And then I heard it. My name, Ryan. The voice froze me mid-step. I didn't have to turn to know. That mix of surprise and calculation, the way it seemed to lean forward, even when it was spoken quietly, it was her. I turned. Emily was standing a few feet away, wrapped in a camel coat I'd never seen before, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. There was no red dress, no practiced smirk, just a cautious smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she said, as if this was some casual run-in between old friends. "Emily." My tone was flat, not cold, not warm, just neutral. For a moment we just stood there, the hum of the city filling the space between us. She was the one to break it. "You look good." I gave a small nod. "I am good." Something flickered across her face, relief maybe, or irritation. "I didn't think I'd see you again. I figured we'd eventually cross paths," I said. "The city's not that big." She shifted her bag on her shoulder, her eyes darting past me like she was checking to see if anyone else was watching. "Can we talk?" "Just for a minute." I considered it. A few months ago, I would have imagined this moment what I'd say, how I'd finally get the last word. But now, I didn't feel that pull. There was no fire in my chest, no ache in my gut, just a calm, steady question. Do I even want to hear her voice past this moment? Still curiosity won. 1 minute. She stepped closer. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, for everything. I know I handled it badly. I hurt you and I can't take that back." Her voice was softer than I remembered, but I could still hear the precision in it, the way she measured each word, careful to land somewhere between guilt and self-preservation. I didn't let her off the hook. "You didn't just hurt me, Emily. You lied to me over and over while using me as your cover for someone else." She flinched but recovered quickly. "I know, and I regret it. I regret losing you." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the words didn't land the way she probably intended. Losing me hadn't been her concern when she was slipping into wine bars with Daniel, or telling her friends she could finally breathe without me around. "You didn't lose me," I said. "You threw me away. Big difference." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, she just looked at me, really looked like she was trying to find a crack she could slip through, but there wasn't one. "How's Daniel?" I asked, not because I cared, but because I wanted to see her reaction. Her gaze faltered. "We're not together. Didn't think you would be." The bluntness made her blink. "You don't sound surprised. I'm not. Guys like him don't stick around, and women who juggle 2 lives usually end up dropping both." Her lips pressed together. "You've changed." I tilted my head. "No, Emily. I just stopped making room for people who see me as temporary." A flicker of something frustration maybe passed over her face. "I hope you're happy, Ryan." "I am," I said simply. We stood there another beat, the moment stretching thin. Then she nodded as if she'd decided there was nothing more to gain and stepped back. Goodbye, Ryan. Goodbye, Emily. I walked away first, not looking back. As I turned the corner, I realized something I hadn't expected. She was just a person now. Not the betrayal, not the storm I'd weathered, not the shadow in my apartment, just another face in the crowd. And that more than anything felt like winning. I didn't go straight home after running into Emily. The thought of stepping back into my apartment, the quiet pressing in on me, didn't feel right. Not when my head was still replaying every second of our conversation. So instead, I walked. The city was alive in that way. It gets after dark car headlights, cutting through the street. The smell of fried food from a food truck drifting into the air. Strangers laughing as they passed. For once the noise was grounding instead of overwhelming. I kept replaying her face in my mind, not out of longing, but study. There'd been no spark when I saw her, no gut punch of missing what we had. She looked like someone I used to know, not someone I still carried. And yet, there was a residue. Not of love, but of what betrayal leaves behind, the awareness that you're capable of being blindsided. It's strange how betrayal doesn't just break your trust in a person, it breaks your trust in your own instincts. 3 months ago, if someone had told me Emily was cheating, I would have laughed. I would have defended her without hesitation because I thought I knew her better than anyone. And that's what sat heavy on my chest now, not that she fooled me, but that I let myself live in a world where I could be fooled that easily. I found myself at a small park, the kind tucked between office buildings with a single bench under a bare tree. I sat down, the metal cold through my coat, and let my mind wander. When I'd first ended things, my plan had been all about control. Collect evidence, set the stage, make her face the truth in a way she couldn't escape. And I'd done that. But afterward, I'd realized that control was temporary. You can't script what comes after. You can't dictate how someone talks about you when you're not in the room. So maybe the real win wasn't in controlling her downfall. It was in controlling my recovery. In the weeks since she'd left, I'd made deliberate choices. I hadn't gone looking for news about her. I hadn't let her last messages pull me into another cycle of explanations. And now after seeing her again, I knew I'd made the right call. Because here's the truth, Emily's regret didn't matter to me anymore. Whether she meant her apology or not, it couldn't change the fact that she'd been willing to risk everything we had for someone who wasn't even going to stay. I stayed on that bench for a long time, letting the cold air bite at my skin. Somewhere deep down, I'd been expecting that if I ever saw her again, I'd either crumble or explode. Instead, I'd been calm, measured. I'd said what I wanted to say and walked away first. That mattered more than I thought it would. When I finally stood and started walking again, I took a different route home. Past the bookstore I used to visit on weekends. Past the little bakery that still put out their day-old bread at half price. Past a side street I'd avoided because it was near the wine bar she used to frequent with Daniel. This time I didn't cross to the other side of the road. I passed it like it was just another building. When I reached my apartment, the new locks clicked smoothly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee from the morning. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, took off my coat, and stood there for a moment looking around. Everything in this space was mine now, not just in name, but in meaning. I made tea instead of pouring a drink, sat on the couch with the mug warming my hands, and let the steam rise between me and the thoughts still buzzing in my head. There was no anger left, no urge to send her one last message, no need to hear from her again. Seeing her had proven something to me, that I could be in the same space as her, hear her voice, and still walk away untouched. That was closure, not a conversation, not an apology, not even an acknowledgement from her. Just me knowing I was no longer carrying her around in my chest. I thought about the version of me from before all of this, the one who was comfortable, maybe a little too much, the one who didn't notice the small shifts in tone, the late-night absences, the phone turned face down on the table. That man had been dismantled, and in his place was someone more deliberate, more aware. Not paranoid, just awake. And maybe that was the point. Not to walk away unscathed, but to walk away knowing exactly what scars you carry and how to protect them. By the time I finished my tea, the buzzing in my head had quieted. I washed the mug, set it in the rack, and turned off the kitchen light. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the floor. For the first time since that night at Roselli's, I felt still, not stuck still. Tomorrow I'd go for my run, finish the client project I'd been working on, maybe meet Josh for dinner. And somewhere down the line I'd meet someone new. someone who wouldn't see me as an alibi or a placeholder, but for tonight it was enough to sit in the quiet and know I'd already won the part that mattered most. I'd let go. In the weeks after running into Emily, something shifted inside me, not in a sudden dramatic way, but like the slow thaw of ice after a long winter. I started noticing things again, the way the sunlight hit my desk in the mornings, the sound of rain against the window on nights when the city was quiet, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery I'd started visiting again. These weren't distractions, they were reminders that life had always been bigger than the one person who tried to shrink it. And yet I knew this wasn't just about moving on. Moving on sounds like you leave the past neatly folded behind you. The truth is messier. The truth is betrayal stays with you not as an open wound, but as a scar you can trace with your fingers, remembering exactly how you got it. Sometimes late at night, I'd find myself thinking about the earlier days with Emily, the ones before suspicion crept in, the day trips, the in-jokes, the quiet mornings over coffee. Those memories weren't lies, they were just incomplete, pieces of a story I didn't know the ending to yet, but I stopped letting those thoughts lead me into what if. What if is where you start bargaining with ghosts, and I was done bargaining. Instead, I asked myself different questions. What had I learned? What had this cost me, and what had it given me in a strange, backhanded way? The cost was obvious: trust, time, a version of myself that I would never get back. But what it gave me was harder to define, sharper instincts, yes, but also a deeper respect for my own boundaries. Before Emily, I might have forgiven too quickly, made excuses for behavior that didn't sit right. Now, I understood that trust isn't just about believing in someone, it's about watching what they do when they think you're not looking. I thought revenge would be the most satisfying part. The dinner, the exposure, the way she couldn't talk her way out once the truth was on the table. But in hindsight, that wasn't the victory. The real win was what came after: the quiet, the distance, the space to rebuild, without needing her to know I'd rebuilt. One Saturday morning, I went for a run along the river. It was early and the air was cool, crisp, the water catching the first light of the day. As I jogged past the spot where I'd once seen Emily and Daniel together, I didn't feel the old knot in my stomach. No bitterness, no flash of rage, just a stretch of pavement like any other. That's when I realized indifference isn't the absence of feeling, it's the presence of peace. And peace had been the goal all along, even when I didn't know it. It wasn't about proving to her that I was better off. It wasn't about making sure Daniel knew he'd been played. It wasn't even about making sure the people in our lives knew the truth. It was about standing in my own life without feeling like someone else's shadow was draped over it. A few days later, Chloe sent me a text: saw Emily at a mutual friend's party. She didn't look happy. I read it once and set my phone down. It wasn't my business anymore. Because here's the thing, when you finally let go, you don't just release them, you release yourself. I'd spent months building that release piece by piece, first by gathering proof, then by confronting her, then by cutting contact, and finally by refusing to give her space in my thoughts. Seeing her again had been the last test, and I'd passed without even realizing I was taking it. There's a strange kind of freedom in knowing you can face the person who hurt you most and feel nothing. Not the nothing of numbness, but the nothing of having no ties left to cut. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker against the dark. I thought about the man I'd been when this started: comfortable, a little complacent, certain of the ground under his feet. And I thought about the man I was now, more deliberate, more self-protective, still willing to trust, but never blindly. I didn't hate Emily. Hating her would have meant keeping a piece of her with me. And I didn't want that. I just wished her well, somewhere far from here. As the night air cooled around me, I found myself smiling. Not a victory smile, not a gloat, just a quiet acknowledgement that I'd survived something I once thought might break me. And in surviving it, I'd learned exactly how much I was worth. That's the thing about betrayal. It tries to tell you your value is negotiable, that you can be replaced, sidelined, used as a placeholder until something better comes along. But when you walk away, really walk away, you realize your value isn't theirs to define, it's yours, and mine had never been higher. So here's what I'll leave you with. If you ever find yourself in the position I was in, questioning, doubting, piecing together a truth you don't want to face, trust yourself enough to follow it through. Don't wait for them to hand you the truth wrapped in an apology. By the time they do, it's already too late. End it on your terms, rebuild on your terms, and when you're ready, live like they were never there at all. Because one day you'll walk past the place where it all fell apart and you won't even notice until you're already past it. And that's how you'll know you've won. If you've been through something like this, share your story in the comments. I promise someone out there needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like mine, subscribe to Ethan's Way. You never know when the next twist might hit a little too close to home.